So over the past couple of weeks, I've done a lot of videos talking about Dragon Kaneki, and specifically Dragon. In those videos, I've talked about Rize here and there just to give more clarification, to give more context to originally what I was talking about. In that instance, it was Kaneki specifically. So today I thought I would go through and kind of explain Rize's process and just solely make a video for her, as she's very important to the story. She's a vital piece to the Kaneki puzzle as well as to Dragon. First and foremost, there's a couple of things I specifically want to point out that I've been seeing a lot of comments about. The first one being the steel beams. For Rize potentially being reborn as a immortal being, her getting killed by steel beams is a little bit weird. I just want to explain this because I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but a lot of people either meme it, which is fine, but a lot of people are generally confused. The biggest thing to know about that situation is that it was fully planned. Furuta planned the whole situation out, and he dropped steel beams off a skyscraping building, or like a construction building I should say. They fell a really good distance and they impaled Rize completely. Ghouls cannot heal from that instant impact of injury, right? They can heal from slashes and massive gashes and even torn off limbs, but when it's more of a solid impact, the healing process takes a lot longer, and it's sometimes even impossible for ghouls to heal. The fact that Rize was even intact to begin with after getting hit by those steel beams is actually really impressive. When you kind of take in the process of Furuta setting it up and dropping these steel beams, and then obviously rushing down and taking Rize and Kaneki's parts to Dr. Canal, obviously going through with the experimentation, and that's that. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You can't obviously heal from such massive steel beams, such a blunt impact. It's like putting her in a compressor, kind of slowly squishing her. Obviously she can't out-heal that, nor can she kind of regenerate from it specifically, so it's extremely difficult. And the other thing I want to talk about, which will lead me into Dragon, is the Rize clones. The kind of question that people keep asking is, was there two Rizes at the end? Was she placed on top of Dragon, or was she birthed from it? So for full context, Rize was under Renjiyomo's control. He was the one kind of taking care of her and kind of bringing her back up to speed after her obviously massive dilemma in those test tubes. When Kaneki managed to free her and bring her back, they looked after her. They kept her locked up and obviously tried to help her out so she'd heal properly, etc, etc. And I believe she was adapting rather well, at least in kind of mild conversations when they kind of sparsely talked about her. She wasn't all too bad. However, there's a situation with Renjiyomo that happens after a little bit, and she ultimately falls back into the hands of Furuta, and you actually get a confirmation for this when you see a panel of Furuta kind of looking at Rize in a test tube. From there, that is the last time you ever see her, right? The next time you see her, she's kind of being reborn from Dragon. So people are kind of like, well, what about the Rize in the test tube? What happened to her? What I think makes the most logical sense actually has to do with the Ogai squad, as Rize at that point was being used a lot as a host, basically, to kind of clone her Kakaho over and over again. Basically, she was going through this experimentation process. She was being experimented on specifically, and it was helping to design the Ogai squad members. Now, the Ogai squad members were specifically created to be fed to Kaneki, but even then the Ogai squad were very different. They, for some reason, were able to, or at least one of them was able to turn on one eye and then turn on both eyes, which never realistically made sense. There was no explanation for it, but you knew just from that to an extent they were very unique. What I think Dr. Canal actually done was fully rip apart Rize, just basically kill her, use every single body part and organ, and created a very unique and pure process with those organs by cloning it repetitively and basically manifesting it into the Ogai squad members. This also wraps into Dragon, because a lot of people think that Furuta took that test tube Rize and placed it on top of Dragon. I don't necessarily think that's the case, nor is it ever confirmed or denied. I just think it's very pointless to do that. The reason why I don't think, Furuta took her body and placed her on top of Dragon is because that is not the process of what Dragon actually is. Dragon is legitimately a birthing tool. That is its actual definition, right? It's an Ovida. When you take what is happening to Kaneki and the clones that he is even reproducing because he's turning into Dragon at a super rapid pace, and then you also look at these beings, these orphans specifically, that Dragon is giving birth to, it makes the most logical sense, taking in the context of absolutely everything, that Rize got birthed from Dragon. She was not placed on top of it for Dragon to specifically reform her for whatever reason. It makes way more sense that Dragon birthed her. Another thing that backs that up is the actual capsule or the egg sac that she was in. That cannot be disturbed, nor does it make sense for Dragon to kind of attach itself to Rize and not think of it as a nucleus or a source to feed into, if that makes sense. In my head, even though she is the original version, even though she has the pure RC cells, there's nothing to say that Dragon would actually build an egg sac around her and then start to remold her. Instead, I think it would actually ingest her and use her RC cells similar to Kaneki, similar to the Ogai Squad members, and work from there. So when you have all of that context, right, what is Dragon Rize and what was she being built into? I've talked about immortality, I've talked about the origin of ghouls and potentially Rize being the purest form of a ghoul to ever exist. In my previous video, I talked about Kaneki's abilities being very close to the original ghoul, in saying that some of the first ghouls wouldn't have a distinct RC type, meaning that they wouldn't have a specific Kagane ability, the Rinkaku, Kokaku, etc. In my head, they would have kind of just one big mess of all of them combined. Rize in hindsight was that, but she was far beyond what Kaneki is after he comes out of Dragon. As when you see her, she is still actually connected to it. She's still manifesting and kind of building herself, which is a very long process by the looks of it. She is absorbing most likely millions upon millions of RC cells to help build and construct a body that is most likely purely immortal. Not only that, but Dragon specifically created these very unique limbs or appendages, whatever you want to call it, like these tendril looking things that Kaneki had to face off with. These tendril things were supposedly controlled by Rize, and they had like this kind of Rize-esque hair on top of their head. This is completely different to the clones that Kaneki was creating and different from the orphans that were giving birth. This was something else entirely, right? These RC monster worm looking things were kind of like a very pure form of what could have potentially been one of the first ghouls and potentially how they were capable of using it. A very unique and pure form with the amount of RC cells accompanied by it. Now the thing with Rize is that if she were to be born, if she was to be fully completed and come out of Dragon, what would happen from there? For the most part, I really do think she would have been immortal, or at least a very close variation to it, considering Ishida focused very heavily on immortality throughout the entirety of the final arc. It's very symbolic for her to be kind of reborn back into the story. The greatest thing about it is that even though she's kind of depicted as the final villain, her story is actually rather tragic. In retrospective, she's a binge eater. You know, she's someone that's very manipulative and someone that's pretty powerful, and obviously she caused all this damage for Kaneki. But even throughout the story, the amount of times she has been captured and tortured and experimented on, to ultimately being saved, to ultimately going back into that test tube and being experimented and tortured, all to end up being killed, most likely to create the Ogai Squad members, to then being reborn and gaining those memories, to ultimately being killed again. When you think about the context of what Rize was, I think she came to accept a lot of things, even death right at the end, as the tendril things kind of had a mind of their own, kind of protecting Rize, but she seemed pretty complacent and obviously just giving up. And you don't realistically see that much of her, but I don't think she really had anything to fight for. It seemed like she didn't want to live, and she seemed somewhat thankful to Kaneki for killing her. In reality, if Rize was born, I don't think the world would have been able to handle what she was, and this is evident from Kaneki's abilities after, and this is also evident by Shikurai, who actually ate a very big portion of Dragon, and he turned into a monstrosity. Still to this day, a time skip at the end of the story, he's still roaming free. He's still roaming around with no one being able to defeat him. Could you imagine what chaos Rize would have caused? She would have uprooted the ghoul and human world combined, and she could have been something else entirely. Maybe the closest thing to the origin of ghouls, maybe the next step in human and ghoul evolution, transcending immortality, transcending healing, absolutely everything, having so much power. I think what she was definitely on track for that, and if for some reason the V organization could control her, they have a weapon to basically rule the world. But at the end of the day, she was being used as a tool time and time again, and I think with how she came to her conclusion, which was with Kaneki being rather symbolic, I think she came to accept it. And and was very thankful. So that's basically it. Let me know what you think of Dragon Rize, because obviously it's a very interesting thing, and I really wish Ishida gave us a bit more explanation for it. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.